Record. Done. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Work Items Weekly Sync for Tuesday, September 14th.
Yay. March is not here, but I will vocalize what he asked, if that's okay. The tech writing team will use Slack channel docs processes to share updates, doc style guides. I'll share future major changes as well here. So follow along Slack channel docs dash processes. Anything to add to that? Cool. I have the next one. I just want to cover real quick because I was gonna put together the release planning issue. I think a lot of these have already been weighted from last release, but what specifically do we want to try to set as a deliverable or a goal for 14.4 from a work item standpoint? Primarily weighted towards the front end since we have more capacity there. And I kind of jotted down a few different things. One, I think if we want to be able to use the new work item view for requirements sooner rather than later, we should probably go ahead and, like Holly designed, a new creation experience workflow that sort of uses the same view app for like creating as well as editing. So it's a single form, and that's there. So we could go ahead and add creating a new work item using the new view that Holly designed and the new view app. But we might also want to be able to add selecting a type of work item to MVC1 if we do that. So that's one decision point I wanted to run by y'all, get feedback on.
Is status still? I'm sorry. Is status?
Oh,
still...
I was.
Sorry.
Holly, you go.
That's all I was asking. Just if status is still a part of that, that was part of the original design. And I have updated the designs to, at least for mobile, I'm working through it right now. But I have updated the designs to include a type switcher. Sorry, Kristen.
I failed to follow through on what I said I would do last week. I apologize, but I did create the issue to have the discussion on how to handle test reports and if we want to treat as statuses. There's nothing there because I just created the issue, but I will make sure that I do that today or tomorrow. I'm trying to balance a lot of things right now, but I don't think we should treat status. I mean, Mark's here now, so we should ask him. He wasn't here last week. So maybe it'd be courageous to have a conversation at some point. But Kristen, you go ahead.
Yeah, one of the reasons we scoped down for the MVC was that we wouldn't handle the switching between elements yet. So I just want to bring that up. If we can just have that in the background for now and get a better experience later and go live with just a feature, just a requirement, and not work on the conversion between objects, I think that would be good. I think Alexis actually has been figuring out how you convert between related items, and there's a lot more that's going to go into it. So unless we need it for testing or some reason, we can't do it in the DB. I think we should probably just stay with the original fields.
It's the only constraint is if we do that, switching is one thing, but there's also setting the initial type when you create a work item. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where if we wanted to, right now, when you create a requirement, there's nothing in the UI that says you pick that it's a requirement, right? But if we want to eventually have the new view app creation form, we at least have to allow people to pick a requirement or a type when they create it, even if we don't handle the switching of the type after the fact, if that makes sense.
I'm still in the camp that experience should be looked at more deeply. And like right now, if you're coming off of a new requirement in the URL, like it should know that it's a requirement that you're creating at that point and should be in the background. I think even exposing the term work item type or issue type is something we're not sure, we haven't really done design on yet.
Well, I'm really confused because you're saying that, Chris, you're voting for saying that we would then go in and we'd have to select new requirement or new issue or new this or new, they'd have to be separate entries, right?
So coming from Epic world, we are in separate codes. So like when you hit the green new, let's say we were converting epics now, when you hit new epic, we're going to know that the type was supposed to be epic.
But I thought that was
we're getting into
we got from our customers is they hated that because they wanted to click on the new button and say, no, I want an issue that's tied to this epic.
I definitely want to get there. I'm just saying we scoped down the MVC to make it really simple initially, that we wouldn't be making the choice in the same UI. That was my take on it.
Okay.
I think it adds
So-
a lot of complexity to testing, and we haven't done the UX for it. And like right now, our goal should just be to get the features up. I know we have a lot more complexity now that we're doing it on requirements, so we're supporting current users. So we may need to build out a lot more before our MVC happens.
I wanted to
big-
point out one thing about using the type in the URL that might work for the creation URL, but it will probably not work for the edit or for the just accessing any kind of work item type, just because say you have a requirement and you have that URL like work item / requirement / ID, then if that requirement changes into an epic or whatever, that URL is not valid anymore. So I'm not saying we should not do that. I'm just saying that we should think about that to probably keep it consistent, where I don't know. Just as a FYI, right? That'll work for the create, that will probably not work for the other URLs.
I was also just going to verbalize, we've already done a lot of UX research prior to starting work items around issue types and like picking a type. And if we weren't doing work items, that's what we'd be doing already for issues, right? And that's where I sort of like, we just need to decide, are we Holly designed up the creation of a new work item view, right? Then what it will look like. It just doesn't have a way to specify what type of thing you're creating. So if we don't want to do the creation part right now, then we would have to add feature as a type to the drop down of the old issue creation issue type selector, if that makes sense. So we can either like do that, or we can work on what we know we're going to be doing. And we don't need to worry about switching and handling all that stuff right now, but at least like when you do create a new work item, you can specify which type of thing you're creating, right? Because I think the ultimate goal is like, no matter where you are at GitLab, you can say, I want a new work item.
I
Right,
definitely agree with that. I'm not on board with that. It was more just that we had scoped it down so that we wouldn't have to even expose that there is a type called feature at this point, because we were going to be able to do it in a greenfield way and not have customers looking at that option and like trying it before we're ready and know how it would behave.
We can still do
We
that
still need
in a greenfield way. I guess that's what I'm saying, is it can be all greenfield.
One question is that if we're only targeting requirements for the initial MVC of that new view, right, and it's only one thing, then we don't really need a type yet, right? We would need that type once we have more than one work item type using the new view.
Correct. I'm just thinking ahead because it's going to be the same thing once we do a feature. Like if requirements are first thing and then we jump directly to feature, then it's sort of the same sort of thing, right? So we could put it in MVC2 if we want, or whatever, but
it's more nuanced because you couldn't just add a feature at any point in the tree. Like we have to just consider the parenting nature of some of them.
can't we address that when we have parenting though? And just treat a
Yeah.
feature as a
For
base
sure.
level
And
thing?
then
And
I think
then
it should be in the parenting epic, and like, but we should not be blocked. I'm just saying we should not be blocked by this. Go out with single level requirements, maybe as a default, and then we'll handle like how and when you could add a feature and what are the requirements. How does it look at its template of its hierarchy? I guess I think MVC3, we would go through that.
Are you talking about kind of like validating that it's a correct hierarchy almost too, Kristen? Or like, oh, you can't add like 5 requirements to this specific item, et cetera?
Yeah. And even, yeah, like right now we have a tiering on epics that only allows single level epics. There's a lot to be sorted out. Or if we start stacking features or project level epics, is that a way to get around upgrading to ultimate? So I just want to make sure you can't just add them on the fly without thinking through the checks and balances.
Do we have like a doc somewhere of like all those relationships and like the constraints around the different types? That might be helpful.
Yes.
Yeah.
to allow issues to the epic in that tile?
So I think all those things are important. Don't get me wrong. I'm trying to go back to the simplest thing of if we were building requirements and then we want to build a feature, and let's assume there's no parenting it work items right now. And if the view is just you want to view a feature and you also just want to view a requirement within the view, you still are going to want to see, since they're sharing a generic URL theoretically, what type the thing is, right? And you're going to also have to specify what type the thing is when you create it initially. Are we in agreement about that?
Has there been discussion in UX research around if we should even still have a separate create page, or if we should just give the ability to, I know we've had conversations around either putting it in a modal or coming out of the sidebar, but even to kind of a less detailed extent, kind of like how we create epics and issues within the epic tree, but just doing that everywhere.
I think that's going, like, once we roll this out, it will be the same experience no matter where you are on the tree. However, it might reference a particular template that you've already set up, such as to-dos are always below issues, or features are always above issues. But I think ideally the creation, the editing at its core, the URLs should all be work the same way and support easy conversion between them as well. Unique IDs that convert between requirements or something else in the URLs.
Hear your question one more time too, Donald. Do we need the same create screen?
Yeah, so right now the plan is to keep our create action separate from the rest of the app, like we have it today, where we have a separate create issue form, we have a separate create epic form. There are some instances where we can do that essentially in app. So on the epic tree, you can create an issue and not get all the details right away, but you can do that within epic tree. You can create an epic within epic tree. We used to have, I believe, on the epic list view a way, it was just a small pop-up. So all you was the type to create an epic. Do we want to consolidate those experiences where we don't have a separate create view and we just do everything within the app?
I was curious about this question that you asked in the issue yesterday. Can you tell me what the opposite of a separate experience would be? Just because I want to be sure that I understand. To me, the proposed create screen is the same screen as the view screen. It's just inline editing. There are a couple of areas where you jump out of that view to go into a separate, like if you need to go into options for a component, then you go into a separate view. But I want to be sure I'm not misunderstanding what you mean by a separate create versus view screen.
Yeah, so I think those are actually two different things that I'm talking about. As far as that one, so that was my question in that issue, is essentially what you just asked. Like if we have a separate create view, should it essentially be the same app as our view or our view page? And it sounds like from what you just said that yes, it should be, which is good. My other question now is more around, do we even want to have a create page? Or do we want to just give the ability to create within other places in the app? So like if they're viewing, we're probably not going to have a separate work item type view, like list view. But if we were, then it would probably be easier just to say create another of whatever we're on, and then we don't have to worry about URLs or anything at that point, because everything can be inline essentially. Does that make sense?
I think it's going to be modal or sidebar or full screen, right? which
And
is the new create. You'd be able to do it over top of the board or over top of the work
Of like
that you're
anything
on.
you're looking at.
Yeah,
right?
anything.
Yeah.
So it would be consistent, but
But I
They're-
don't think that was MVC. I've got the designs in place.
No.
but I don't think that was
MVC is credit, and then we'll need to enable it
Mhm.
in its different forms.
But
Holly,
we,
do
I
you
don't
want to
know.
show what we have and then we can like react to that? Maybe that would help.
And Donald, I don't know if that matters, but I think there would be kind of like inline experiences as well. I don't know if that was what you were asking, but I think that makes sense too.
Can you all
Or
see
grid edit or table edit.
which screen would be most beneficial to look at initially?
Maybe like just whatever it looks like when you create a new work item and then when you edit a work item, because this is like basically what we're talking about for MVC1, right?
So this has changed, I think, a little bit since our conversation just now with regards to having a feature switcher, but originally it was just adding a title, an assignee, and a description. And that would all be inline editing. That would just be something you would just type in and change it for the title. For the description, on mobile in particular, it goes to a separate view where you can then continue to edit and toggle between write and preview. I still think that there are ways to improve that UI, but just to keep it lean for now, that was the proposal for the description. The items like assignee though, and any other widgets moving forward, my vision for that initially, and I think that there is value in visiting each one of these components individually and looking at the unique opportunities for each of those. But I like the thought of going into a separate panel view. Let me see which one might be a good example. Like this, where you are, again, switching to kind of a separate view on mobile specifically. And you kind of have full use of that real estate to navigate through assignees or the other options for that particular component. On a desktop, though, that would all display as just a little like popover. So it would just be a little box that would overlay the view. It would be the same content, but in mobile, it would be a screen overlay, and in desktop, it would just be like a little pop-up overlay that would sit kind of over the actual widget. I can pull up a prototype, but any questions about that? Does that help, or does that maybe raise more questions, concerns?
So is that the full screen layout as well? Like currently, it would, right now, the way we have it, so it would just render over to the left like that, or would it center if we had a really wide screen?
I created two views. One is a modal option, and then the other is this full screen. I think the full screen we should offer in any case, but yeah, the proposal here is that it would sit to the side simply because eventually we will, I'm hoping that we are going to pursue the split screen approach where you can have the comments on the right and then the actual layout on the left. At least that was what we had originally talked about. I don't know if that's changed for long-term vision. Let me just pull up the view of that really quick, just in case anybody wants a refresher. So something kind of like this in that case, where you've got your title, the layout has changed a little bit, but title and description on the left, and then the actual discussion portion on the right. So this was just, again, lean MVC with the hopes of keeping that space open so that we can have that allotted later for being able to show those comments.
This is tweaking my memory, so I remember. Thank you. I think
Sure.
for me, I would never get to that view on my 13-inch. So like seeing it at the wider screen a little bit with the stacked layout would also help for me to visualize.
What do you mean by the stacked layout? Do you mind just
like just top? Oh, just I'm assuming that the stacked, when you bring it down, would go back towards the mobile view, but be wider.
Oh, right.
Like the descriptions up top and the comments are below.
Yeah. So if I go back to,
You can also use Flexbox to make basically it's smaller on a smaller view, and then you have a button that you toggle between side by side and like horizontal or something like that. So that way you can pick how you want to view it, right?
Yeah.
So there's a couple different ways you could tackle it.
I'd find it distracting to read comments when I was trying to write, but yeah, it would be kind of cool to have like an option to go between those two layouts.
Mhm.
It's hard. It's equally
Um,
distracting when you're trying to write and also reference something in the comments.
Yeah, like to like
Yeah,
pull
so
it up
that's-
while
yeah.
you're, there needs almost to be two modes, right? Like,
Can we go back to the discussion about what's going to be in next milestone? Thank you, Holly, for showing this. I think it definitely helps us see like what it will be beyond the first iteration. And now we just need to pick like what we're going to take on first.
There is a video walkthrough too, by the way, that I had recorded some time ago of all of this, if anybody wants to review it, or I'm also happy to just hop on a chat with someone and walk through it as well. The only thing that's missing is the test status stuff for requirements, and then the type switcher, which it sounds like we may not include that for this design anyway. So just an FYI.
Can I make one more request before we decide what we're going to commit to? Can you put the new issue view that you had and the create issue view side by side? Just so I can ask any questions if there are any discrepancies, because if they are exactly the same, essentially, then I'm fine with us committing on the front end to doing both within a single iteration or MVC. If there's differences, that probably adds a bunch more work. So I would not be comfortable if that were the case.
Sure. Do you want them side
Sure.
by side in an issue, or I'm sorry?
oh, go ahead.
If you can do it real quick now, if not, yeah, just in an issue is fine.
I can.
I wanted to clarify too, is that the modal, having it load in a modal, does that also need an issue and a place in an MVC further down the road?
Yes, I think so, because I think if we do have it in a modal, we also want to make decisions on whether we still show everything within an issue. Like if we still give them the ability, give people the ability to add any field within that create form, or if it's just inline where it
shouldn't be
like it is today.
Yeah, I don't think it should be a downgraded experience. I think you should have access to all of the fields, just like some of our competitors do when you open them up on the mobile. However, and also the other thing is, how do the URLs track to that? What do we need in terms of knowing if it should open as modal or as the main page for it or sidebar?
Donald, I took a screenshot of this and I'll send it to you just in case you want to look at it a little more in depth. But there was also part of the original design, an option that I had created to toggle between those views. So there has been some conversation around that as well, if anybody is curious about that.
So going back to the question, since we're tight on time, one of the issues in the MVC one is create a new feature, right? Now that we have requirements in play, going back to what I was originally saying, if you're creating a requirement or if you're creating a feature, wherever you create the thing, you're gonna have to know what the type is that you want to create within the creation form. So that's sort of like where I was suggesting that was the only scope change, not even switching, just displaying what type the thing was when you're creating it. And then once it's created. So that way, because we already have icons done for requirements and features, we can change them any point we want in the future. But I just thought that, like, I'm trying to figure out how to get the acceptance criteria for creating a new feature to a place where we're happy. So.
So what do you need from us? Sorry, I need a copy. How can we help make that decision?
I guess I'm just asking if that's okay. I think it's the right thing to do, but if there's pushback and why we shouldn't, then I want to be open to that as well.
So you're proposing just show the issue type as an icon or something versus just start with assignee status title?
Yeah, like let you pick what the type is when you're creating the thing, and then maybe not even make it editable once it's been created, but then you show that icon once it's created for the thing that it is. That's it.
I just want to make sure we have everything in place for features, and we've had the pricing discussions, and I don't want it being exposed yet.
I mean,
Um,
it's not, it should all be behind a feature flag theoretically, right? Because we don't have features, we can't launch features. We're not even gonna release this. I'm just thinking about building it as if we're gonna release it in 6 months. What's the logical order to build things so that it's progressive, it like progressively works, if that makes sense.
Are we able to put specific types behind feature flags? Because I feel like that would be a good, that way we can put type in, maybe it'll just have one thing initially, right? But that way we could hide features until Kristen feels like they're ready for prime time.
I guess it depends if we're allowing them to be selected or not. So like you could put features behind feature flags. What happens if a user okay, so I guess it depends on the functionality we intend to build. Like, we're going to allow a drop down that will allow people to select a type and pass that to the back end. Then we have to detect on the back end, that somebody might select a type or input fish or something, like try to hack the thing in some way, which inevitably somebody will do. I don't see any reason why we couldn't feature flag it.
But we
A
will
specific
have
type.
to add just a lot of boiler code, basically, like a lot of if then code, like I feel like it's adding quite a bit of work just to hide it out. And I'm wondering if we'd rather just not add it and leave it for the end, if that's what we kind of want, because that seems like what we want. Like, it will not be different from an issue type, right? Except we'll need to have a kind of a tree widget, but we will probably need that tree widget anyway for the other items that we already have. So if it's from like marketing or pricing perspective, then we seem to want to leave it rather to the end than add the ifs and so on. Does that make sense?
Initially, like the greenfield object would prevent having to support these, right? Like, so we wouldn't have to keep one thing live while we worked on the MVC. But I think now that we have both, maybe we could just, I don't know. I have to think through the consequences of it, but I don't want just our customers starting to add features until we've nailed how you add them in the right place in the hierarchy, and we have limits on depth, and we have the right tiering. And this should just be a test to get parenting right. And get things in the right spot.
I agree with that completely.
So that's what you were saying, Alex, right? Like, we'd want to build all that stuff, the validations, the features that a feature will have, build all that first and then make them available. And then it's irrelevant really if they're behind a feature flag or not.
Yes, but also like there's a lot of stuff that like a feature needs to have that will have to be within the existing types, so to say. So issues like right now we have issues that relate to issues. Those will also become in a way, like you can also display those in a tree view. So you kind of need a limit of depth as well if you're going to display them in that way. So we need this kind of limits anyway everywhere, because otherwise we're going to just hit these performance problems as well. So
what if we built in the mechanism to scope it just to our project or our org at GitLab initially? Is that a way to semi-feature flag it where it's an object that we have access to in the DB only and no one else, versus in the code? It's like a parent in our, or it's an object in our hierarchy, but no one else's.
yeah, I think we can do that. Like, again, I'm not going to give a definitive yes here, but I think that is an option as well, to just have it for us only, because that means we are basically defining a new type for a specific namespace for a specific hierarchy. So I think that's an option, yes. But again, I would have to look in more depth and see if I'm not missing something here. But yeah, generally I think so, yeah. I think that's an option because we will be adding all of these types for every single root namespace. And then if we want to kind of give it only to GitLab, org or com or whatever, then we can basically run a migration, add that, and we'll have that there and do the testing and whatnot, and then deliver it to general availability kind of thing.
That works. That sounds good if that could work.
Yeah, it sounds like this is like an investigation issue to figure out how because this will be probably something we need anyway, right? Because we'll have different types that we want to roll out incrementally. So just like a strategy for how we do incremental rollout of types, right?
We could have a GitLab hierarchy saved in the DB too. That's just epic issue feature or something. A concept around that we've applied to our org.
Yeah, it would be nice to gather all of these requirements somewhere to have visibility, because like, yeah, like we don't have, I think, the hierarchy definition amongst types yet. Like we can define a type, but it'll all behave, like you can assume that right now defining a type will all behave exactly the same as an issue behaves, basically.
Okay, Alex, do you want to make that issue for investigating the right way to
Sure.
have features come in? Okay.
Alex, would you mind adding me to that? Just ping me or something in it, or just share it somewhere. I'd just like to kind of
Yeah,
follow
I'll ping
along.
you.
Thank you.
I've got to drop for another call, but I'm okay if we're able to segment it off like that and then still have the UI showing the type. Like that's cool with me.
I know you had
And then-
created several issues, Kristen. I'll update the issue that's relevant to that with the new design.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Well,
y'all.